Record now for its annual Board of Finance meeting. And we want to welcome everybody who has joined us here in the ESC, along with anybody who is joining us via our live YouTube feed. Thank you. This is an annual meeting that the Penn-Harris-Madison Board of School Trustees conducts. I'll call the meeting to order now. The first item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. Board members, any changes? Administration?
The administration has no changes.
Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda for the Monday, January 9, 2023 Board of Finance meeting as presented?
I so move.
Second?
I second.
All those in favor vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed vote nay. That motion carries by a vote of 4-0. Next up is the approval of the minutes from the January 10th, 2022 Board of Finance meeting. Board members, any additions or changes? Hearing none. Administration?
The administration has no changes.
Then do I have a motion to adopt the minutes for the Monday, January 10, 2022 Board of Finance meeting as presented?
So move.
Second?
I second.
All those in favor vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed vote nay. That motion carries by a vote of 4-0. Moving along, I'll now call for nominations for officers for the Board of Finance, starting with the Office of President. Currently, Mr. Larry Beeler serves as President of the Board of Finance. Do I have a nomination for the President of the Board of Finance?
Mr. President, I nominate and move that Claire Roach serve as President of the Board of School Trustees, the
Thank you.
Board of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Beeler. Is there a second?
I second.
I now move that the nomination cease and a ballot be cast for Ms. Claire Roach as President of the Board of Finance. All in favor vote aye. Any opposed vote nay. Motion carries by a vote of 4-0. I'll now call for nominations of the Office of Secretary of the Board of Finance. Previously, Mrs. Angie Gates served as Secretary of the Board of Finance. As she no longer serves on the board, we will need a new member to serve in this role. Do I have a nomination for Secretary of the Board of Finance?
I nominate and move that Mr. Ryan McCullough serve as Secretary of the Board of Finance.
Thank you, Ms. Roach. Is there a second?
I second.
I now move that nominations cease and a ballot be cast unanimously for Mr. Ryan McCullough to serve as Secretary of the Board of Finance. All those in favor vote aye. Any opposed vote nay. That motion also carries by a vote of 4-0. Congratulations, Ms. McCullough and Ms. Roach, and I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Roach.
So at this annual meeting, the Board of Finance is required to appoint its investing officers. The administration recommends that Mr. Jerry Hawkins, Executive Director of Business Services, and Mrs. Maureen Munger, Accounting Coordinator Deputy Treasurer, be appointed to serve as the investing officers for the corporation. Do I have a motion to approve the appointment of Mr. Jerry Hawkins, Executive Director of Business Services, and Mrs. Maureen Munger, Accounting Coordinator Deputy Treasurer, as the investing officers for the school corporation?
So moved.
I second.
All those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries by the unanimous vote of 4-0. Thank you, Mr. Hawkins and Mrs. Munger, for your willingness to serve as investing officers for the PHM School Corporation.
Did we have a choice?
We'll pretend like you did.
Okay, that works.
You're selected.
And as your congratulations, would you like to present the 2022 investment report to the board at this time?
Well, certainly, I'd love to. I think what we'll do is we'll start off with the investment report. I am required to provide you a written report of investments, and that is the second document. I don't have it as part of this specific presentation that I'll go through here in just a second. This basically just goes through the interest and dividends that we've earned and the basic policy that we use. It really hasn't changed, except I did want to point out that and we'll get, as part of my presentation, I will provide a graph that will show you the interest earned over the last few years. We did have an increase in the interest we earned, up to a little over 1.5 million in interest, up from just under 1.3 million last year, primarily due to the increase of balances in the bank. Our interest rate, we locked in an interest rate that was very favorable for us. It's a little less so today because investments can be found closer to our rate, but at the time we did that, rates were very, very low, and we were basically benefiting from this agreement with TCU. There's also an investment policy that has not changed, but it is in written given to you for your pleasure. I will not read it because there's no reason to read it to you. But it basically says that we do good investing and the maximum term is 2 years or less than 2 years. So that's basically all it says. All right, let's go through fiscal indicators. Basically, the fiscal indicators started a number of years ago by Distressed Unit Appeal Board, DUAB. We like to use DUAB because it's just fun to say. And they came up with a series of reports required by House Enrolled Act 1315, established a committee, and these 7 members came up with these indicators. They have changed a little bit over the years. I just noticed a few minutes ago that the 8 interactive reports is really 6 interactive reports because they reduced it, but I forgot to change the title. So ignore the 8, pretend that's a 6, and I'll go through those 6 briefly here. First one is average daily membership. Obviously, our attendance is a major factor because funding follows the student. Why is it not going? There it goes. Fund balance is another one we'll look at, and you can run that through. Each of these interactive reports, you can select what funds you want as part of the report and a variety of ways you can make the report look. All of these reports are available to the public. The one disadvantage is they're a bit in arrears. In other words, most of the reports are already by today a year old. And that's the nature of them collecting all the data and putting it in a report that then can be compared school to school. Most of the time, the reports, like I will give a report, upcoming board meeting about the 23 budget. I'll have up-to-date information and I guess more real time in a sense than what some of these reports are, but they're also good to look at historically and some of that information. We'll also look at annual deficit and surplus in the different funds, or the reports can. Fund balances as a percent of expenditures. That's always a good report to say because a fund balance only tells you part of the picture. When you do it as a percent of expenditures, it gives you a different bit of information that is helpful, I think, to look at. And then 5th one is revenue by type. I notice it's a little hard to read, but the last one is operating referendum revenue. And obviously that doesn't apply to us because we don't have a referendum. So we will not go through that report because it would be all zeros. So let's start. Here's the first one. And again, it might be easier to see on your screen, but the basic idea here is this goes through the average daily membership historically over the years. And I don't know if you remember, but I've had several cases throughout the last year where I've given reports of what our ADM is. It's basically the same information you see here. The one thing you might note, if you remember the 21-22 school year a year ago, when the fall count, a little over a year ago, we had a reduction, and that was simply because of the loss of students in our Penway program because we couldn't count those students who were over 23 or 23 or older. Our actual enrollment within our other buildings, it went up slightly. It was just primarily due to the loss of being able to count those students in that program. So this kind of goes through each of the different ones. It shows the fall and the spring, and then the virtual count because we get a different amount of money for the virtual students. This one's a fun one, lots of colors, lots of bars. I love it, but it takes a little bit to really understand what it's saying. Each bar is a different fund. And part of the problem here is they changed funds in 2019. So it's hard to compare 18 to later because the general fund was eliminated, capital projects, bus replacement, transportation were all eliminated and moved into operations. So it's difficult to do a comparison. You can compare 14 to 18 and 19 to 21 pretty easily, but beyond that, it's not real helpful. You can see the light green is the one that says general fund. And in 19, it's no longer there because that became the education fund primarily. Some of what was in the general fund moved to operations. And by all means, if there are any questions,
Can I
jump in.
actually ask you a quick clarifying question for our two new board members? So can you just very loosely, probably the two most important funds are the education fund and the operational fund? Can you just very loosely explain the types of monies that go through and what they're used to
Sure.
pay for?
So the education fund is primarily what used to be called the general fund, and it covers the direct services to students primarily. So if you think of all teachers working directly with kids, what's going on in the buildings, those services directly to students. It does include the principal, but that's about the only administrators that are in that fund. Aides in the classroom, supplies, those kinds of things are all covered in the education fund. The operation fund is a little piece of what used to be in the general fund, which would be custodians, central office administrators. Those people are in the operations fund, along with capital projects fund that used to be a separate fund. Transportation fund used to be a separate fund. Bus replacement was separate. And then we also have art and historical museum that we do provide funding for them that we're basically a pass-through for them. Those are all together in the operation fund. So those are primarily the two funds that are obviously the biggest, and really it's what the budget process is really about. Those two funds and debt service are really it.
Did you say that education fund has the principals themselves in that, not the operation fund?
Correct.
Then would the assistant principals be in the operation?
No,
Or would those be in the education?
they would be in the, if they're building
If they're in the building.
a,
so like
a
Verizon
school
Elementary,
building, yes,
Principal and assistant principal. Okay, thank you.
yes. Yeah, good clarification. Sorry, I should have said principals and assistant principals, teachers on assignment, those kinds of things that are direct in the buildings. Okay, any other questions on that? Did I answer those funds clear enough? I mean, I could spend forever talking about them because I love talking about it, but it was interesting when they switched to us old timers that did the general fund for years and years and years, and it was really turned our world upside down, but now we got it. It's all right. Now, this one talks about the annual deficit surplus within a given year. And you want the bar on the left each year to be higher than the bar on the right. That tells you that you had more revenue than you spent. You know, they're very close in terms of 19, almost identical. 20, we had a slight deficit, but again, it depended on revenue, how we spent. The other thing is, it depends on, you know, if this is including all funds, you could have construction money come in that you don't spend until the projects get done. And then the next year you could be spending money out that didn't come in revenue. So you got to always think that there's a lot of factors in this, as with any chart really that they're talking about here, is there's a lot of behind the scenes things going on. But the key is, as long as you're within range and you're not consistently overspending budgets, then, or overspending revenue, we don't overspend budgets, but overspending revenue, then you're in pretty good shape. And you can see in 21, we had a good surplus there that year. Okay. Here is a representation of fund balances as a percent of expenditures. So what this does is, rather than just looking at a balance in a fund, it says, how much money do you have in that fund as a percent to your annual expenditures? And you can do it as a percent of your revenue. You could do it as a percent of your budget, and you can do it as a percent of your expenditures. Each one of those tell a story. As a percent of expenditures is probably the best, because it takes into consideration what you spent that year and then says how much did you have in the bank to cover that expense at a given moment in time. This particular chart is just the general fund education fund, and you'll see in 19 it was a dip, and that was part of this adjustment moving to an education fund, because that money that was in the general fund, some of it had to move to education fund, and it created it. And then you can kind of see we bounced back out around that 15% level for the education fund as a percent of the balance as a percent of expenditures for that year. Then this next chart is the same information, except it includes the operation fund. And it's a higher percentage because, and one of the things that occurs is historically in the last few years, we've not spent as much out of the capital portion of the operation fund because we've been doing other bigger projects with a lease or a obligation bond, general obligation bond. So we do that in a construction fund that doesn't apply here. And what that does is give us a little more flexibility in our ability and allow us to keep a little higher balance when you combine the two together. So that's why the percent is higher when you include the operation fund, because it carries a decent balance, and we don't have as many expenditures right now. With COVID, we had an increase in expenditures. We had a variety of things going on. Now some of that is settled out, and we're feeling more comfortable with our balances that we have. Okay, questions? This one, I look at this every year and chuckle because you got to kind of really dig into to try to figure out what it's saying. I still don't know quite what it's saying. But it's basically trying to give you an idea of what revenue you have coming in. You've got, obviously federal stimulus, and honestly, the stimulus money it comes after we've spent the money, and so it's later in the process, and this only goes through 21. That when you see a 22 graph like this, the federal stimulus will be bigger because we have received more. Other federal revenue would be Title I and special ed, those types of things that come from the federal government through the state, but it's federal dollars. The big blue bar is the state revenue, which is primarily the tuition support or basic grant, whatever you want to call it, that goes into the education fund. Other revenue, the local can be all kinds of things, just that come locally outside of property tax. So that could include CVET, commercial vehicle excise tax, license. All right, let me get this right. CVET, license excise tax, and FIT, financial institution tax. Those are some of the major ones that come through as other local revenue. Debt revenue, a variety. It could be interest earned on money we have in a variety of ways. Operating referendum, obviously that one is zero because we don't have one. And then the bottom one, which is kind of the orange reddish color, is the local tax revenue. And you can see that it stayed fairly consistent, a little bit of an uptick in 21. Questions on this graph? This is my favorite one. It's a little hard to read on the screen, small print, but big numbers. I came in fall of 2017. I just have to say that because in 18, we got this deal and we negotiated a really good situation for us and saw a significant increase in revenue. And so that's when that began. The green bars are the interest that goes into the construction funds. So when we do a GOB or lease funding, we get that money up front. We earn interest on that money as well. And that's what the green part of those bars are. And you can see a significant increase in 22 for actual interest earned. And the numbers at the bottom, again, they're hard to read, but you can kind of get an idea of how much goes into each category of funding. We used to back in, what is that? If I can read that. Is that 17? I can't hardly read it. Used to put some money in rainy day fund, and that was decided to change from putting revenue from interest into rainy day. I am going to propose here in a little bit that a future board agenda item would be to change that and put some money back into rainy day as part of interest. So interest earnings, I recommend in 2023 that 10% of the operation fund earnings, we can't impact the construction because that's required that has to get its share. So I can't take that out. But what goes into the operation fund, we have flexibility on where that goes. We have in the past most recently put 100% of it into the operation fund. I'm recommending 10% of that earnings that went into that would have normally gone into the operation fund, the 10% go into the rainy day. That's approximately 100,000 a year. It's not a drastic move. I've gone through a lot of different options, and we've talked at previous board meetings about ways to add some funding to the rainy day fund. And this would be one way to do it. It's kind of gradual. It's based on what interest we earn in that given year. You will see it come up on an agenda item or as consent agenda if you are okay with that. And then we would reevaluate it each year, see how it's working. Is that what we want to do? It gets receipted into the fund each month. So that portion, it's for the year, it's about 100,000. It'd be roughly, $8,000-$10,000 a month, roughly. So any questions on that or thoughts on that?
I guess I got a question. Since interest rates are moving up, is there any thought of trying to negotiate a higher rate?
Absolutely is. And I've been thinking about it and debating on it. There's a fine balance. We had a 5-year agreement with TCU. It has worked out extremely well for 4.5 of those years. It's still working out well, but not as well. And the debate is how we approach that. I was surprised that the bank, that TCU did not come back and request a renegotiation of the agreement because the way interest rates just were down for so long and so low. I had numerous people wanting to get a chance to take our investments, and when I gave them a clue of what we were earning, nobody could touch it. Now it's a different story, but I think it absolutely needs to be reviewed. It comes up this summer. So negotiations will begin in a few months to say, okay, what can that look like? And I don't know where we'll end up, but we will definitely be looking at it. I am not prohibited from doing some type of either CD investing or something else at this time, but I also want to be a good partner with TCU. We had an agreement. They gave us a very good rate. Let it stand when rates were very low, very favorable for us. I don't want to turn around and then when things go a little bit the other way, feel like we jump ship immediately. So I've been debating that for a couple months now, and we'll be having discussions with them soon. That what you wanted to hear, or that?
Yeah, I wondered if you were gonna look into it.
Absolutely. I mean, I look at that number every month. I look at those kinds of things and say, what can we do? What can we do better? And that is one thing that we have to consider. Absolutely. Any other questions, comments?
Just to make 100% sure I clear what you're proposing. You're proposing that we take money that we're earning as interest in the form of interest, and that is how we begin to repopulate our rainy day fund?
Correct.
Okay.
That's my recommendation. It doesn't do it as fast as I might prefer, but it's systematic. It's a process. It can be changed at board's request or preference. And rather than taking a fell swoop of a transfer that could occur, this seems to be a little more systematic, long-term, better gradual approach to building the rainy day fund up back to where I would like to see it a little higher.
Is there any other business for the Board of Finance at this time? Any other questions?
Couple things, just one last slide. Oh, that's small. Fiscal indicators are simply a step to provide transparency to the public. And all of these are available to the public. All the slides that I showed, except the interest slide is my own, but the other fiscal indicators are all available for any school district in the state. You can do a comparison going through the public website. The fiscal health of PHM is positive. One thing to note is we receive the same foundation tuition support as every other school in the state, but we receive below average total because the complexity factors are not in our favor. But it's a fairer way of funding schools than it used to be, in my opinion. We have the lowest school tax rate in the county. And as of for 2023, you'll get more information, future board meeting, we are the lowest in 2 counties. We dropped a little bit our tax rate. And so both Elkhart and St. Joseph County, we have the lowest tax rate of any school district in those 2 counties. I haven't done further investigation of surrounding counties. I just did those 2 today to confirm that. So something to be proud of. We'll continue to do good things for students and monitor our finances as we have for many, many years. I'm done, sorry.
Any other questions? Mr. Hawkins, thank you very much for your thorough presentation, for all the hard work you do to be able to share this kind of data and fiscal health. Do I have a motion to adjourn
I so move.
the January 9th, 2003 Board of Finance meeting of the Penn-Harris-Madison Board of School Trustees?
I so move.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, vote nay. Motion carries by the vote of 4-0. This meeting is adjourned at 6:57.
I don't know. I did an experiment.